Zooming right in here, guys. Welcome to the Pat Flynn Show. Got Dr. Jim with me and a new guest. IJ is here from the Kazingram Dialogue
Yes, sir.
podcast, and
Excellent.
we're gonna have an open jam. This
Yep.
is gonna be fun. I said open jam on philosophy, religion, mind, metaphysics, whatever we want to
Yep.
talk about. So we'll see where it goes, and if people want to join in the comments and throw some questions, that would be most welcome. But IJ, it's your first time on the
It
podcast,
is.
so before we start playing around here, why don't you take a few minutes, introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do? And what are you thinking about?
Man, so first of all, thanks for inviting me on. It's an honor. I've listened to multiple episodes on the Pat Flynn Show.
Oh, well, thank you.
I've
It's
dropped in
very
on a
nice.
few live chats, which you guys
Yes. Yeah.
have entertained me on, and so I'm the co-host of Kazingram Dialogue with my good friend Amos Dober, and on that podcast we talk about philosophy, neuroscience, culture, and religion,
Mhm.
and I'm a big philosophy guy. I love philosophy. I did my MA in philosophy. Was planning on doing a PhD, changed my mind, and went into
Smart.
tech instead. And so I'm in the world of startup, and that's where I am. And I keep one foot in the door by talking to the guests on the podcast, and I think that's been very helpful for me, kind of seeing a third person perspective in the world of academia, and not having that pressure to conform to the ideologies within academia.
Yeah, right on. Real
And
quick, now IJ, you actually helped build Jim's new slick website. Is that correct?
Yes. Jim
help.
and I
He
worked
built
together.
my website. I mean, let's be
Jim and I
clear.
did together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Help is it's charitable, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna embarrass IJ here, okay?
Uh-oh.
Because IJ is a far more interesting dude than he just let on there.
Oh, I
Okay.
know,
Right.
Very, but he's also the most humble dude. That we
Yeah,
know.
he is. He is. So IJ, were you born in Canada?
No,
You were
I was
not, right?
no.
Yeah. Your family fled oppression from India, right, to come to Canada, and you were what, like 10 years old at the time? Am I right?
Yeah. So back where I'm from, the state called Manipur, and there's been one of the longest civil wars in India. And so, during the height of the Civil War, which I think must have been around 1990, 1998, 99, maybe 2000, early 2000s, around that time, we had to flee the city because
Mhm.
my parents are Christians and my dad's minister, and that at that point that whole state was majority was Hindu, and so there's a lot of persecution happening. So we fled and went to the village, and we lived in the village maybe for about a year or so. And we were there, and my parents previously had a string of um, um, run-ins with the local, um, with the local Hindu, what would you call them, Hindu militia, and then also with the other tribe militia. And so we had essentially at that point it was like, okay, it's our safety versus just kind of staying here,
Mhm.
going to church. It was because we had people showing up to our gate, because it's everything there is gated, right? In India here, one of the most surprising things to me to this day is walking around and people have grass lawns and you can simply just enter the door. And to me, that's still, every time I'm walking, I think, man, I could just break into this guy's house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
I'm not going to do it,
Yeah.
but there's
Right.
no gate to go through. There's no dog that's guarding it. So we had at one point we had this.
Yeah. By
We've
the way,
had a
you
few people.
definitely would not want to try that here in Kansas.
Yeah, I don't think it. I mean, in the
Because
states it's different. In the
yeah,
states it's different, right?
in Kansas, there's a dog and a gun.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
and that's more. And in one sense, that this is what I'm doing now is pop psychology, armchair psychology, but or sociology, I should be
Jim and
clear.
I are fans of that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
It seems that people who live in gated community, gated community is not the right word, but who live inside of a gate or a
Mhm.
fence, they
Mhm.
seem to be actually more open than people who live in this quasi open neighborhood where it's open in that, oh, you can see my front yard, you can see my
Yeah.
kids playing on it, but they're not as open in terms of actual relationship.
It's not the real human reality, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we we fled the town that we were living in, or the
Mhm.
city, and then went to the village, and then once everything calmed down we came back, and obviously the situation is still pretty crappy back home.
So you came to Canada in what year?
2012. So it's going to be 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
And I bring this up because I'm gonna say like embarrassingly good things about both you guys here. So I hope you don't mind. Is so IJ, you've had the immigrant experience, and not just the immigrant experience, like fleeing oppression. Like you've lived that, right? And you're a jiu-jitsu player, right?
Mm.
And a teacher of jiu-jitsu, right? And have like helped keep a gym alive through the nightmare that's going on lockdown wise where you're at and all that. Okay. Married man, you've had challenges there in terms of loss of children, right? Like you're a startup guy, you're an entrepreneur, right? You have an academic background. Your Kazingram has been an immensely successful podcast, right? I mean, where are you guys in Apple now among philosophy podcasts? What is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's to our surprise that we keep landing in the charts out in the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah. So like, were you like number 10 in Russia for a while or something like that?
Nice. Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, so I just want to note IJ is this very interesting Renaissance guy, like, and it very much in like the Pat Flynn generalist way. Okay. And I'm going to say it's going to embarrass both of you guys, but I don't care.
Embarrass. There's a term for this. It's called the immigrant's edge, and it's something I've hugely admired for a long time. So I love talking to people who have this experience, who come from tough backgrounds, come to America, and they do not, or even Canada, right? And do not waste the opportunities they have here that they know they did not have where they come from. I love stories like that. So please continue. Both of you.
Mm-hmm. And so, when I was thinking about this just on my way up to the office just now to do this conversation is, in the last couple of years, some very.
I think Jim got cut.
Yeah. Jim, you still with us?
Jim.
Very handsome still we have there. He'll come back in. This happens occasionally. He'll pop back out and come back in. But
while Jim's not here, I wanted to ask you, Pat. I actually don't remember.
You there?
Oh, yeah.
There he is. Back. All right, he's back. But all right, who are we going to? Yeah. You go ahead, IJ, and we'll work Jim back in here in a minute. Yep.
I'm back. You got me? Yep.
Yeah.
So I probably shouldn't have mentioned the lockdowns, but anyway.
Yeah, you just got.
Yeah, I'm back. Okay, so, and when I think of the people that have helped me think a lot of stuff, just practically, and even just my view on a lot of issues, it like you two guys fall in there in very similar ways. It's probably you two, Michael Ferguson of Harvard, and probably my jiu-jitsu coach Derek Ripley, right?
Wow, putting us up there with the Harvard neuroscientist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Trust me, Michael's probably flattered too. You've met Michael, IJ, yeah. Anyway, and so that's how I heard about Kazingram, is when Michael was on there. But
oh, interesting.
And so the first podcast I was on was Kazingram. Yeah, that was the first one I was on. And so I find you guys very interestingly similar in a lot of ways, different too, because the immigrant thing. But you're both what I think of as para academics, right? You're academically trained guys in philosophy. But neither of you are into playing by the rules of like standard mainstream academia now, and you've just gone out and created your own para-academic environments where you can do it, right? Do you know what I mean? Pat in a very interesting way has this very, very good, very successful, online fitness. I guess we call it enterprise, right? And you found a way to like use that to platform your way into basically an academic platform. Right. And it's a great expression of what you're doing. It's also, you're like bringing people into thinking and reading and talking in a way, right? And IJ, very similar thing, right? That you had expertise in this area, you had other enterprises you were doing, and you parlayed that into this other thing that's becoming an influential, very, very good and like helpful platform, right?
If I can just say one quick thing about that. First off, flattery will get you everywhere on the path.
It'll keep me on both your shows, and that's really the point here. Yeah.
But IJ said at the beginning that he didn't want to sort of conform to the pressures in the academy, and I definitely feel that, right? I'm not the type of guy who just likes to be provocative for the sake of being provocative. But as it happens, most of the things I care about and want to talk about today just are inherently provocative and controversial.
Yeah.
Many of them taboo for reasons that I find completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I could never function as a professional academic in that sense, because all the things I would want to talk about, argue about, or at least most of them, maybe not all of them, are things that I talk to with all my other friends, with few exceptions, like you, Jim, who just won't touch these things, right? With like a 10-foot pole.
Right.
And to me, that shows there's something extremely broken with academia in so many different ways.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
I agree.
So if we can just do some little bit of just advancing the conversation in places, I think it's important. Like, that's where the future is going to have to be, right? Because it ain't going to be in academia for this, right? Like, they're gone, right?
Yeah.
They're so far gone.
It is the one of the telling marks of faculty, maybe just academia as a whole, telling marks for me to understand if that university or that area as a whole is dying, is if they have, what I call the DIE, right? The diversity, inclusion, equity, an officer who's a DIE, the officer of DIE. I mean, I think they call it, like, they try to avoid the DIE, DIE. I just call it DIE because I think it's appropriate. And when I deeply care about academia, as much as I think that it's broken in many ways. I think it's broken, and this is not a unique thing to say, but I think the way that it's being done, there has to be a different way of doing it. And there's the push for kids who are 18 to go into academia to take $100,000 debt to do a 4-year program in the liberal arts, and then come out when they're 21, 22, and to think that, oh yeah, those 4 years in which the majority, this is something that I only found out near the end of my undergrad, was a lot of people are actually taking drugs, right? They take Ritalin and all this other stuff to help them, and some of them don't even read the work, right? And then they pay somebody. I had a friend who I won't name, but this is a friend from, like,
is his name Amos?
No. I had a friend from my boarding school who, he went to the UK and did his stuff, and he told me that he was being paid in the UK, I don't know what their seniors, the third year or equivalent to the fourth year, paying him money to write essays, and he was getting paid a lot of British pounds.
Not uncommon, and it's I guess it's one thing if somebody does that for their whatever degree. I'm not going to trigger anybody by calling out something specific, but we all know what I'm thinking, right?
Yeah.
But I know people, friends of mine, that did that for their degree in medicine and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's scary.
That's pretty nice, right?
They're taking brainstem and cheating on their chemistry tests and all this other stuff, and now they're practicing doctors.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, like, we're buddies. The guy I'm thinking of, we're not really friends anymore, but, like, I'm never going to you for help.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And even if, like, there's this question of, like, how much your performance in med school predicts how good of a doctor you're going to be, right?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. But even, like, you've shown yourself to be a pretty untrustworthy human being, right?
Right. You've shown yourself that you're willing not to do the hard work.
Yeah.
And that you're probably just generally, as a person, not cut out for this business.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a deeper concern.
Exactly.
Right.
And go ahead, Ajay, please.
I was going to say just to add to that, there are engineers who in engineering school, right? The computer engineering, whatnot, and civil engineering, who cheat on their exams and their tests. And we're talking about civil engineering, right? If you're doing a civil engineering, you have to build buildings.
Exactly.
We're not talking about, like, oh, I'm going to build an app and then I can cheat my way through, right? If you're a dev person, you can look up code on GitHub and blah blah blah.
If you cheat your way through philosophy, you could always read the book later, right?
Yeah, exactly. But a civil engineer, you have to build buildings, and the Hammurabi code of if you're a bridge builder, or if you build something, you have to live under it for a year, so that if the bridge fails, then you're going to die with it. Now, I'm not saying that you should do that with engineers, but there is that sense of skin in the game of where if you're cheating your way through, when when what you're designing counts, you're putting tons of people's lives in danger.
Yeah.
And, you know.
And so if I can continue with my ode to Pat and IJ, right? So, because this all, I think, I just with all this in play, and I think it all interrelates. Is so, because IJ, you just turned 30, right?
Yes.
And Pat, you're 31, right? Right. And he says with a grin. And so I'll be 48 in like 6 weeks here. Okay. And so I'm I know.
Probably one of the best looking 48-year-olds.
Right. I know. I'm exactly right. And so I'm, what, 17, 18 years older than you guys. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of like, right in the middle of Gen X, and you guys are kind of on the young end of millennial, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's interesting. So for me coming up, I was educated by a bunch of unreconstructed, baby boomers who were part of the counterculture. My dad was, very much a cynical Vietnam veteran for very good reason. And all my professors in college were like, had been, in the counterculture. Right. And so like a lot of Gen Xers, I came out of that with this like fierce sense of individual independence and like this smash the machine mentality. Right. I think, a way to think about it is like a lot of Gen Xers had that and still do have that smash the machine mentality. I think a lot of the millennials have a, how do I make the machine work for me mentality, right? And the iGen, and I think millennials get wrongly confused with the iGen, right? Or the Gen Z, okay?
Yep.
Yeah, because the Gen Z are the snowflakes. They're the like, I want the machine to take care of me, right? I want the machine to relieve me of my agency, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's like, okay, you two guys really have taught me that for whatever its vices, there are virtues to the machine, right? And the attitude should not be smash the machine. It should be, because it's here, right? It is here. And the question is, how do we use it? How do we get it, right?
That's just Milton Friedman's philosophy on the Federal Reserve, right?
Yeah, really, yeah, exactly is. And so before I met IJ, like the idea of like, being on the internet, podcasting, having a Twitter account, right? IJ having a Twitter account. Remember some of our earlier conversations were like anathema to me, right?
Yeah.
And I think you guys have taught me. It's kind of like the Neil Young thing. I was older then, but I'm younger than that now, right? I think you guys have taught me that in fact, cooperating at some level with this is actually affording me a kind of academic freedom I didn't have, right? It's affording me access to people that I can help and people who can help me. And I had been myopic. I had just been too stuck in like,
right.
Tech is undermining my mind. And I still think it is in some ways, right? And I think you two guys definitely have taught me that. And I think that's one interesting things to learn from your generation of millennials, not the iGen, your generation of millennials. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting, Jim, because I don't know any other life or world, right? I've never had a real job a day in my life. I mean, I worked at Pizza Hut for like a week when I was 16 because there was a girl that I liked there. She quit and then I quit, right? And that was pretty much it.
And you guys have been married for a while. No,
different girl, right?
We don't talk about that.
So like this is just what I've always done. But it's interesting that what you say is like, I sort of looked at the situation. Here's what I have. Here's the tools. Here's the skills that I need to build. I want to be independent. Now, I wasn't thinking when I was younger that I want like academic independence, right? It just didn't totally interest me. But I did want financial independence. I did want a certain degree of life autonomy that I hilariously take very little advantage of. People are always like, Pat, you can work from like wherever, Bermuda. Like, why are you in Waukesha, Wisconsin? I'm like, I like it here, right? I do the same things every day. It's like, it's there's a story that some guy once told me about. There was this cat that he had, and the cat would always get mad when the door was shut. But he would open the door and then the cat would be happy. But the cat would never go outside of the door. The cat just wanted the ability to go outside of the door, right? So I feel like I'm kind of like that. Like I like to stay in my like little place and do my simple life Wisconsin things. But I like the idea that I could.
You have FU money. That's
the FU money, right? Exactly, right?
Exactly. I've done the day in the life of Pat Flynn, and it's pretty cool.
You guys were together at one point. I
this summer. Yeah.
hanging out. So it's not too bad. So be the seek out possibilities for being an online hunter gatherer. I think is the lesson that Jim's trying to instill here.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think from you guys, I really have learned. Like I learned something I missed in your generation, right? And I learned like what kind of one of the myopia of my own generation, or some of us in my generation, was just this mistrust of anything that came from the machine. Right.
Too much rage against the machine in your 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
But hilariously, like they should just call themselves raging with the machine now. I mean,
exactly.
Like those guys have just completely sold out. So I want to talk about a lot of things with you guys. I see we already have some questions coming in. So we'll jam with the audience here. So send in whatever you have, guys. So IJ, back to you, man. So you seem like just the kind of guy we love to have on the show, a good philosophical generalist. What got you interested into philosophy, religion, all that stuff?
Yeah, so I got into philosophy, and this is somewhat sad to say because the person I'm about to mention has now had a very bad rap within the world in general. His name it's Ravi Zacharias, and he's had now a bunch of scandals that have come out. But he essentially, probably when I was 18 or something, I listened to some of his stuff, and he was putting out words at that point which I didn't really understand. He's like, there has to be objective truth, because if we're talking about subjective truth, then claiming that there's no objective truth isn't objective truth. And I was like, what? Like, what is this guy on about? What kind of mushroom is this guy on? And then, but that got me interested in. But when I did my undergrad, I actually went for theology, and I was fascinated by the church fathers, and I was reading a lot of Athanasius. Mainly like the 4th century guys, right? So 325 era of the First Council of Nicaea. All those guys I was reading, and I realized that theology as a field, as we speak, like theology as it exists right now, is quite anti-philosophical in terms of not caring too much about metaphysics, right? And
I call it witchcraft.
I mean, it is in one sense that, right? So people do systematic theology and they talk about how important it is. Not that I don't think it's not important. It's just that when you're doing theology without an underpinning of proper philosophy, it's obviously everybody has their own thoughts about what proper philosophy is. Without that, I realized, well, my theology, the theology I'm studying, it doesn't make sense. There are lots of things that the early church fathers, the way they would talk and the way they would write, right? When Athanasius is writing against the Arians, he's very philosophical, but also very polemic, right? And it's quite fun to read. But I realized if you're reading, let's say, Karl Barth, right? People love Karl Barth. I don't hate him or anything, but it's not, to me, it's not that fun to read, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously, just because it's not fun to read, it doesn't mean it's not worth it. But it's that the lacking of metaphysical underpinning made me realize, okay, maybe I do want to do philosophy, and then got in, did my MA. I did it on the problem of evil, drawing on Aquinas, Maimonides, and Avicenna, and then that's essential. And then I stayed in it. I got super interested. I want to do ethics as well, but obviously you for your thesis, you can only pick one thing.
You must specialize. You must do one thing.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And there's philosophy of mind that I'm fascinated by, and I keep asking Jim what he would probably consider stupid questions, but to me these are questions that plague me in my sleep. Right, when I'm sleeping, or when I'm about to fall asleep, I'll get a thought, and I'm like, I have to think about this more.
Now I got to message Jim again, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, what Pat and I were messaging during my workout this morning about philosophy of mind.
Yeah. I got this issue of this strain of thought in Thomism that I actually think is unjustified and needs to be
figured out,
worked out a little bit more. For a paper I'm trying to write in philosophy of mind, and I'm like trying to get this in there, but I'm like, I actually don't think this is going to work. And I was bugging Jim about it. We can come back to that. I want to talk about the problem of evil, actually, because that's on my mind, and the fact that you've sort of focused on this, I think this will be interesting. The reason it's on my mind is because Jim has me watching this Terrence Malick film.
Oh yes, is it with
A Hidden Light? Have you seen this?
Not that one. I saw the other one. The
Thin Red Line. Yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't seen that one, and it's if I didn't already know this before, which I do because I looked up Malik's background and Jim told me. I mean, like this is a film that is a great contemplation, of course, on the problem of evil and goodness and truth and all this or that. And there's a line in there where the main character, short story. This guy is he's a Catholic dude. He's in Austria. He refuses to pledge an oath to Hitler. They stuff him into jail, and eventually, I won't spoil it, right?
Yeah.
So there's this part, right, where he's kind of arguing with this. I guess it's this guard, right? And they're arguing about the justice of this war, and his objection is, well look, there's got to be some difference between a war that's just and not just, and he's like, look what's going on here. And the guard's retort at one point is like, this God you're appealing to, he created this evil, right? And I'm like, oh, that's a great theme. Let's bring it up on the podcast, right? Because this man is not a privationist. So it's just like literally, I messaged Jim about that before.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's talk about that on the podcast. So maybe this would be an apt time. I'd be curious to hear just some of the work and thoughts that you did in your master's program there, IJ.
So just to a caveat, my work in my dissertation, my whole dissertation is essentially anathema to the philosophy of religion as a whole, and the reason for that is obviously I'm just a man and with just an MA, so
but we're para academics here. We don't care about that.
It's that the problem of evil to me is not a problem at all. It in one sense. Okay, of course, evil happens. I think part of the problem with the discussion of the problem of evil, I think there are three main problems. The first one is people talk about the problem of evil without actually defining and sort of going into the metaphysics or the ontology of what evil is and what good as a non-moral good is. And we sort of just say, oh, I think we all know what evil is, which is true. When you see evil, you can sort of pinpoint it. But to get the ontology of evil or what we consider bad, that's not really discussed. And the second thing is there is a sense in which theodicies, this is more critical of theists. Theodicies, in my opinion, don't work at all, right? Theodicies only work if you're already believing in some sort of God, then you can actively justify your reasons for believing and why evil happens. But purely from just an existence standpoint, where you're kind of dropped into the world, theodicies don't work, right? Because you're interacting with the world, and if you don't have an understanding of God as a general whole, theodicies will never convince anybody. So the way that I think about it, I am heavily influenced by Thomas Aquinas, for better or for worse.
For better,
and
almost always for better.
And I take a stance on the privation, that evil is just a privation of some good that ought to be in that thing, right? Whether that's an arm, you're a human and you should have two arms, you're missing one, that's an evil. You're a human, you have two eyes, you should see, you're blind. And so the argument is just, the fact that the fact that evil is in the world is evidence for God at least understood as existence itself, because you can't have evil in the world without existing things.
Yeah,
they have their existence borrowed. So,
right.
This is your master's thesis, IJ?
Yeah.
So
So like what you're saying is, if you understand what evil is, I'm going to see if I'm getting you right here. This is really slick. Okay, and I mean that in like a good sense, right? So you're saying if we understand what good and evil are, right? And goodness is something that basically tracks being, and evil is something that tracks non-being.
Yeah.
And you admit that there is evil in the world. You're saying there's a privation of being, which then like commits you to there being, right?
Exactly.
Which now you're hooked into implicitly this whole active existence metaphysic that's in play. So it's going to be hard now to resist something like the Dante argument for God's existence, right? So in the background, you know the problem of evil is answerable, even if there's no possible theodicy, because you know you've got a perfect being on your hands one way or another, right? Am I understanding you right there? Yeah, that's really cool, man.
Yeah, this
that's
is
very cool.
Good. I'm glad we're on this theme because, and IJ, you brought up some really good points. Let's make some distinctions for the audience, right? Because most of my work on the problem of evil is not theodicies. I'm with you. I don't. The best theodicy that I've read, if you even want to call it a theodicy, is probably Eleanor Stump's, but I think she would still classify hers more as a defense, right?
Okay.
A defense with biblical commentary, and a defense for the gentle listeners in the audience is really just something that just diffuses the problem of evil, but it doesn't give a narrative or story of saying, well, this is the specific reason why God allows or permits evil.
For all we know, God could be doing this.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, there's different problems of evil, right? One is a metaphysical problem of evil, right? Is evil something that has a positive ontological status? If so, then if God is the creator of all things, then he is the creator of evil, right? So traditional answer here is a privationist theory, right? And that is, at least upon final analysis, maybe not upon superficial analysis, but upon final analysis, evil will always be a do-good gone missing. Now, there's some tricky things you got to handle with there, like pain, but you can do that because you can say, look, not all pain is bad. And there's good arguments to say that pain isn't even a quail, actually. So you can get into philosophy of mind here, which is a cool move that like David Alexander makes and stuff like that. So even the tricky stuff, I think at the end of the day is susceptible to a privationist account. Even if you don't take the full traditional privationist account, then whatever axiological framework you adopt, it's always going to be one where you can't conceptually make sense of badness unless there's prior goodness, right? So no matter what axiological framework, you're always going to have goodness sort of as the more fundamental thing, right? So then if you have God as more fundamental.
Yeah. Which is IJ's point, which is like being is always more fundamental than not being. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, certainly true if you take the fully traditional privationist account. But I know some contemporary philosophers who will say they're agnostic about being a total privationist, but they still say there's a clear asymmetry here, right? That no matter what axiological framework you adopt, goodness will still is conceptually prior, more fundamental than badness in any sense, right?
Yeah, I mean, by goodness, we simply mean being. Like
we would, right? Yeah. So, and that's part of the thing. Like, if you've got, there's kind of like two ways I think of like you can kind of build this out, right? One is you can just make a sort of direct argument for the convertibility thesis between goodness and being, right? And there you're just going to have like some sort of functional concept of good. X is a good K would mean that X has features relevant for being a member of K to whatever degree. Then you argue that the first instance of K is going to be a first instance of goodness, and then you have the convertibility of being and goodness right there, which I think that's a good argument. Yes, needs to be built out, right? But then if you just make an argument for the privation account, that indirectly supports the convertibility thesis, right? So you can go at it one of two ways there. And I think you're spot on, IJ. I think that's the way to deal with the metaphysics. That's the way to answer. If I was in the hidden life, that's what I would have said to that guard. But take that, sir.
I mean, you know, the problem of evil, it's easy to talk about the problem of evil when you're not in it, right? When it's not happening to you.
Of course, right.
And so when it does happen to you, that's when you realize, okay, do I really believe in this, in what I'm writing and what I'm talking about? And you know, I think part of the issue with talking about evil is we're talking about philosophy, so anybody can talk about anything they want. And for me, it's that my commitment to whether I truly thought that my argument was solid was when it happened to me, and then I realized, okay, as much as I don't want to believe in God, I cannot consciously deny the existence of God, you know, and that was a very tough pill to swallow at that point. But it's that. So I mean, evil. So I mean, the problem of evil is not really a problem if you know, when you, at least in my opinion, if you see evil in that sense, the way we just talked about. But it can't. I think it's a big. I think the problem of evil is a big issue, and it is an issue if you believe in Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior and God Himself, then the problem of evil becomes an actual problem, right? Because you now have Jesus who, and there are theological ways you can manipulate or like justify certain things, but just from a existence standpoint and reading Christ as it is written in the Gospels, there are lots of claims that Christ makes about evil, about sickness, about if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move a mountain. And these are and then he tells a parable story. If you're committed to Christ, to Jesus as as your Lord and Savior, as God Himself, then I think the problem of evil now becomes an actual problem. But if you are purely a theist in terms of a classical theist of actus purist or a theist, you can simply not be agnostic, but it's not really a problem because evil, it points straight to the existence of God. But when you bring Christ in, then it becomes an actual problem, which I think oftentimes because the conversation happens between Christians and and atheists, but the conversation should really be just theist and an atheist, and then there's no problem in that sense. But it's just a problem with
that's interesting. One real quick, and then Jim, I want you to hop in on this. I just wanted to make the quick acknowledgement of what IJ's saying. Right, it's really easy for us to flap our lips here in the podcast, right, about the problem of evil. There is the philosophical problem of evil, then there's the lived problem of evil. And one of the things I told Jim about the hidden life is it's based off a true story. So I went and got this guy's letters when he was in this Nazi prison he was writing to his wife. I mean, man, this stuff is moving. But you see a man who's on his death sentence, right? And this is a man who's just filled with the conviction of his faith, right? Facing arguably one of the, if not the most horrendous forces of evil that ever afflicted our planet, right? And it's like that. Like, I could not think. I'm not going to again spoil it. Just go get these letters, everybody. They're like $10 for the Kindle version, right? And you can just read this man's letters to his wife from this Nazi prison, right? Where he's just saying, like, look, it's the Feast of the Sacred Heart. I'm praying to our blessed Lord. The Blessed Mother's going to carry me through, and he keeps that all the way through to the very end, right? And it's funny because in the movie, and this is emphasized, and they try and break this man down because they're like, look, you're a nobody. This is never going to get to the authorities. Nobody's going to know about this. This isn't going to inspire anybody. And like, there's an implicit argument for God in that story, right? Like, here's a guy that nobody really should have known about, and now he went on to inspire how many people through these letters of this pure instance of just supreme goodness and conviction. And now he's got this huge movie. So like the ripple effects of something like that just always astonish me. But that to me is like, that's the practical problem of evil. And what I would, like, we can all talk about what we should do in certain situations, but would I do that in that situation? I have no idea, right? What would Pat Flynn, the great coward, actually do? I have no idea, right?
Right. Easy
to say what you think you should do. Hard to be confident about what you would actually do. So, point well taken. Jim, you wanted to get in on something.
Yeah. This is something I've done on Pat's show before, but I don't know if you and I have ever talked about problem of evil, but
I don't think we have.
Yeah. So I really like that distinction you're making kind of between two problems of evil. So on the one hand, you have what I call the evidential or the natural theological problem. Like, does the occurrence of evil act as a counterexample to God's existence? Okay. And I'm not particularly troubled by that problem, although it's a fun game to play, and I just published nothing on it, right? But because and basically, I'll even go biblically there. Like the answer Job gets to that problem is, okay, where were you when I made worlds, son?
Yep.
Right? And it's basically, for me, it's skeptical theism for me works pretty well. In that, hey, would we expect there to be no evil at all? Well, that's the Job reply, or from the whirlwind as well. Okay, I do what I do, so yeah, we're not surprised that there's some evil. And if you have a problem with that, go ahead and make your own world. Okay. But then so would we expect there to be evil? We're not surprised that there is. And once we've turned that corner, it seems to me in principle impossible to say how much there would be if indeed God's running this. Okay, so I think the idea that we can look at the quantity of bad things in the world and say that's inconsistent with the existence of God, I just don't think that's within our ken. Okay.
Here's another point that I want to make about that is that God obviously allows for arenas with a wide range of autonomy and moral evil. Now, I think that there's some threshold that would not be crossed, right? There's some line where I believe, God wouldn't allow that threshold to be crossed. However, I don't know what that threshold is.
I don't know what that line is. Yeah.
I don't know what that line is, but given that there is a line, like, so say the line is F, right?
Yeah.
But
I always go with the single burning kitten possible world.
Right. And I think it's well before that, but it's F, right?
And no animal's been harmed in the making of this broadcast. Right?
But then you have F-1 actually occur. And it's just something that's a little bit away from F, right?
Yeah.
Now that might cause you to think like it's really strong evidence against God, but we actually shouldn't be surprised that even if God has boundaries in what he would allow, that some things might bump up right against those boundaries.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's something that's often missed in these problem of evil conversations. And sometimes these get called gratuitous evils. I call them mysterious evils because I think that's less question begging. Right. And with that consideration in place, and also the consideration that God sees and works on the whole while we only work on the parts, I think we actually would better expect things like mysterious evils on theism than atheism, which we've talked about at length before.
I think there is the response which I hold to. It's that the moment you have existence other than existence itself, the possibility of evil is always going to be on the table, right? Yeah. And so it doesn't matter. There's no in my opinion. There's no scale to how much evil there could be or how many evils there could be, because the moment there's existence, right, other than existence itself, the possibility of that existence that now has a dependent existence can fail to fulfill its potential or can fail to actualize its potential, and that we call evil. So then it could be, having a huge planet in terms of existence is much greater than a human being on this tiny planet, right? If you have a planet with tons of, other animals on it, but that planet, going would be, if you could quantify it, would be much greater than a planet on Earth going away. If this planet was, 10 times the size. And so I think there, the evidential problem of evil with William Rowe, his Burning Fawn, it tugs on your heartstring, but it doesn't really do anything, because if we're talking about existence and we're talking about being, to be in this world is to essentially be immortal and to have potentials. So, evil is not really, I fail to see why evil would be a problem.
So I agree with you, and I think we all agree on this. Is like at that I'm not troubled by a metaphysical epistemological problem of evil. Okay, but there's this other thing, okay, which is, and this is when you're in the belly of the beast, right? Like, why would I love this deity? Like, I'm asked to love this deity, right? And I admit this deity is within his rights to wail on me if he wants. Like, he can make a bet with the devil, right? That the devil can break me, right? And this deity is within his rights to do this, right? I mean, okay, thinking Job. And so I think there's this.
I want to come back to that Job thing. Stump's got a brilliant insight on that scene. Mm-hmm.
And so there's this other problem. Like, why would I remain faithful, right, to this deity? Like, why do I care about this? Why do I believe this deity loves me and all this? Okay. And I think for me that's the more profound problem of evil. Okay. And I think when people really talk about the problem of evil, when they're not just trying to like score points, right, that's the issue. Okay. And okay, and so for me, my source on this is Dostoevsky. Okay. And I love that you're bringing up the Malick stuff, because I think like one of the very obvious influences on Malick is Dostoevsky. I mean, like, especially Tree of Life. I mean, there's dialogue in the Tree of Life that is like almost verbatim, embarrassingly obvious quotations from the Brothers Karamazov, right? And so you're like, Terrence, could you be a little more subtle here? Because it's a little over the top, right? But there's moments where it's almost verbatim quotations, right? And so in the Brothers K, there's this really important moment where Ivan, he gives this really scathing, standard rationalist problem of evil deal, that, and then he brings up like all these gratuities, like go ahead and tell me why this, and it's interesting. Ivan doesn't draw an atheistic conclusion from this. He just draws a nihilistic conclusion from this, right? He doesn't say therefore God doesn't exist. He says therefore I'm going to turn my ticket in when I've had my kicks, right? So he's basically saying I'm gonna milk this life for how much I can get out of it, and I'm gonna kill myself, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting. He's not making the metaphysical point. He's perfectly happy to say, yeah, there's a deity, okay, but he just does not seem to care much about us, right? Or he's cruel or something like that, okay? Or at the very least, I find no consolation in this. Mm-hmm. And in the novel, it goes more or less unaddressed, okay? And it's interesting also, I think you have to understand too that Ivan has just returned from France, and so he's been influenced by the Enlightenment, and he's got these progressive ideals now, and he's kind of like on the left now, and he wants to knock down the old system and like recreate a world. Okay, and this is important for the Job thing. Like it's like, yeah, I don't like the world you made, God, so I'm gonna go ahead as part of this progressive thing and make my own world.
Right.
Right. Do you see that? Okay. As a reply to the evil that I see in this world. Okay. I'll take your position. Right. And it's interesting. I think if you get a reply to it in the Brothers K, it's Father Zazima a bit later in the novel.
Yeah.
Who begins by talking about his sense of reverence and sense of connection to every single tiny, minute part of nature. Okay. And he talks about like every leaf, every tree, the beauty and the intricacy of it, and his sense of connection. I know people are like, oh, it's all like wooey and new agey, but like what he's saying is I, Father Zazima, I am part of this world. Mm-hmm. This world, and it's not like I stand outside this world as some neutral observer. Okay. I am part of it. Right. And then he does this thing that I think people miss what he's up to here. And he says, so when you come to me and you say how evil the world is, my only question to myself is, what is Father Zazima's fault in this? What have I done? Right. That's the only question for him, because he is the world. He is interconnected to it. He doesn't see himself as this disengaged agent that stands outside and judges the world. He is a creature. He is a part of the world. And if the world is bad, he's bad. And so his question is, what do I do? What have I done? What do I do? How do I go forward? Do you see that? Okay. Yeah. I think this is Jordan Peterson, clean your room.
Oh, it is. Yeah. And that's
before you go and say, I'm going to remake a world in my image because the world that God gave me was no good. The real question is, but is my own room clean? Because I am in that world. I am part of that world. Right. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I want to spend some time on this. I know problem of evil isn't the most fun thing to talk about always, but the reason I keep returning to this is like you guys, like I have this intellectually resolved. I really do. There's a number of things I don't have intellectually resolved, specifically like in philosophy of mind, right? A lot of open questions in Pat Flynn's life. This one, I feel like I do have a good intellectual resolution here, but it's still a deep practical problem. And I know it buggers the hell out of a lot of people. So I want to I just want to spend time on this out of respect for the problem of evil, right? Yeah. And I feel like some of my greatest spiritual fruits have come from meditating deeply on the problem of evil, both philosophically and when the hard times hit, right? What I want to say quickly about the Job thing, right? I'm going to borrow directly from Stump here. She develops a beautiful idea that God can have a fractal nature of suffering where two people can be both means and ends simultaneously. It's beautiful, right? So Satan is an instrument for Job, so Job can grow in holiness and get both the objective pole of flourishing, which is deeper union with God, and the subjective desires of his heart, which is to be a holy man. That's what Job wants, right? Well, God can let the devil have his way with him, and that'll be one way of helping what Job wants, right? So using Job as an end. But Job is also an instrument, Stump argues, for Satan, because in this dialogue, what God's trying to do is show Satan that he shouldn't be so cynical, right? So Satan isn't just an instrument. Satan himself is an end. And God is actually loving Satan in a sort of in a very deep and profound way. So Satan is a means for Job. Job is himself an end. Satan is an end. Job is himself a means for Satan. And like when some put that together, I'm like, damn, that's some beautiful insight in all this. And I'm like, that's just got the ring of truth to it, right? This is why that God should be praised, because what does God care about? And this is where I get a little bit pissy about some of the solutions to the problem of evil from certain Thomists. They're a little too cold, a little too stale. Brian Davis, I'm looking at you, my friend. It's not enough just to say that God isn't a moral agent, right? God is love, right? So if you're going to say that God isn't a moral agent, I agree that he's not bound up with the human nature and doesn't bear the same obligations we do to perfect himself, because God is already purely perfect. However, God, we can have moral expectations of God, given what we can know through our philosophy of God, and certainly, I think, through Scripture, right? That there are certain expectations we can have of God, even if we shouldn't be anthropomorphic in those expectations, right?
At the end of Davis's evil and the reality of God, he has a chapter on the Trinity where he basically does this.
Right. Yeah. So he does.
Everybody's so offended getting there. Right?
He softens in some places, and his points are good. We shouldn't be anthropomorphic. What binds us morally is our human nature. God transcends these limitations. He's already perfect. However, God is perfectly loving. He's perfectly rational. So even though we can't make always specific predictions, and we shouldn't hold God to human moral standards, God isn't going to make that world of one burning kitten, for example, right? And God isn't a crude cosmic utilitarian who's going to, for example, I think this is an issue with greater goods defenses, right? God didn't aim for the Holocaust so some people could be brave. That is like the worst type of response you could possibly give when people are like, well, if we didn't have the Holocaust, we wouldn't have brave people. Like, if you want to make me throw up, say something like that, right? The stupidest thing you could ever say. I think the right response, and I'll get your guys' thoughts, is Jacques Maritain. He's like, what does God want? He wants friendships, communion, and love. That's his primary aim. Now, to borrow from IJ, as soon as any finite creature is brought about, they're not their own rule anymore, right? Only God is good per se, subsistent goodness. Everything else has to look beyond itself to a standard. Anything else God creates with intellect and will can fail, right? And as it happens, they do fail. So Maritain's huge on this. He's like, the price paid for love is risky, is that God creates finite beings. Now, the reason he does that is because God knows that if and when we do fail, he can then draw greater goods out of it. But the primary aim is love. It's really is love at the end of the day. Yeah. And the reason Christianity is so beautiful and makes so much sense to me is not just because of the historical evidence for it and this or that, but it fits so well with the good as self-diffusive. Something has gone wrong. We have failed. And what is the incarnation? It's the good drawing us back to itself, right? It's those philosophical and metaphysical considerations. That's why I love Christ. That's why this God can and should be praised. We failed, yes, but that was the risk of love. God's working with it, not always on our time scale, right? Not always in the way that we want to do, but often, and this is the point of Stumps, in ways better than we could ever imagine, even if we can't see it now. And we have to hope in that. We have to trust. And when I see stuff like The Hidden Life and I read those letters, I see that's exactly what God is doing, even though I'm sure that they didn't see it at the time, right? So yeah, sorry, quite a rant there. Could you guys pick it up?
In connection to what you said and what Jim was saying in terms of, what is the response? As I've thought about this, as somebody who never used to like Kierkegaard's work and thought it was just, useless philosophy, this is the naive analytic philosopher training. I think, and I think there is, when it comes to, when it actually comes to you having skin in the game, I don't know if anybody's a fan of apologetics. I'm not a huge fan of apologetics. I don't think you can give reasons to believe in God when evil is occurring, and for reasons to believe in God. I think it has to be an existential commitment that you make, because reason's not going to get you reason can get you very far, but in terms of actually committing in the moment of when you are witnessing evil, there is no argument that's going to make you say, oh, I'm going to say. You have to, I think, of course, I think you have to make that existential commitment to say, okay, I'm going to believe, I'm going to have faith. And this is very counter to lots of my own thinking, but I think that's, and it's influenced by Tolstoy's The Confession, right? That tiny ass book, which is like 78 pages or something. And reading that, Tolstoy goes through his whole journey of being very wealthy, being very famous, having gotten all the prizes in literature, and being completely not unsatisfied with his life, and blah blah blah. And at the end of the chapter, if nobody's read it, this is spoiled. At the end of his little confession, he just simply says, "Oh, I'm just going to commit to God and to my faith," and he ends up creating his own little cult. But when I read that, I realized, right, retrospectively, if you believe in God, if you believe in God, if you believe in Jesus, God, retrospectively, you could justify tons of things, right? Probably we can justify, but when you're not there, I don't think any justification provided by apologists or philosophers, it just doesn't seem to work. But I think retrospectively, it does help people who are already committed and now want to figure out, okay, is there a good reason to hold to this? And then you can create the reasons for it. But in the moment, in that suffering, there's no reason that will ever pull you across.
Yep. This is Heidegger's notion of resoluteness, right? Where you've authentically owned your belief, and part of that is for Heidegger is like to admit the contingency of it. Like, you could really be wrong about this, right? And in some sense, you hold it partly because you're just thrown into it, like you can't help it. And there, and you can only go so far to justify it. And at some point, you realize, for all I know, I could be wrong on this, right?
Yeah.
And it could be. Yeah, it could be, right? And
resoluteness is great on this. The certainty of faith is on the side of God, right?
Yeah. And resoluteness for Heidegger, it's basically doing, it's a secularized notion of Kierkegaard's faith, right? Okay. And it's remaining resolved to it, even though I'm admitting I very well could be wrong about this. But it's in the resoluteness, in remaining on the practical side of this, like going forward as if it's true, as if I were certain of it, that then keeps you involved with the world. This is what we talked about last week in our soon to be dropped podcast, right? It's on that practical side of it that's going to let me go forward in the practices that will then let being show itself in those practices as what it really is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I actually think this is all over Hidden Life. Okay. Cause, remember Malik was, could have been like the greatest Heidegger scholar of his generation and decided he would rather make films and Hidden Life. So like Heidegger's notion of truth is taking things that were hidden and bringing them into unconcealment. And so what is Malik doing with the Hidden Life? He's taking what was once hidden and bringing it into unconcealment, showing its truth. Okay. And what does, I forget his name in the main character of the film, Blessed Hans something, is it? The main character of Hidden Life, what does he do? He remains resolute. Mm-hmm. Like there is no reason. Like he's in the belly of the beast. There's no reason to think anybody's running the show, right? On the side of goodness, right? But he remains resolute. He remains to the practices. And what does that do? Throughout the film, the light is shown to him. Like the light is shown to him. The way is shown to him. Things come out of concealment because of his resoluteness, right? Because he acts as if there's a point to this when there is absolutely no evidence that there's any point to this whatsoever, right? Yeah. And he's told again and again.
Terrifying thing, right?
Yeah.
Is you can commit to it knowing full well that your commitment to it could be completely useless, meaningless.
And you have to understand, and I think this just goes back to Pat's point too, is the man, okay, so throughout the film, and I assume this is maybe revealed in the letters too, he is told again and again, look, man, you're going to die. No one will even know it, right?
It's not going to do any good, they insist that.
It will be hidden, right? No one's going to hear about this. It will be hidden. It will be hidden. It won't do anything, right? There's no point to this. It's pointless. It's pointless. It's pointless. And he acts as if there's a point to it, right? That's resolution. That's faith, right?
Yeah, right.
When it seems like there's no point to this, I will continue to act as if there were, right?
Right. You've convinced me, both of you have convinced me to watch this movie.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
I haven't finished it yet. I'm very close. Yeah. Like literally, I was watching it when you guys messaged me on my iPad and rudely interrupted a beautiful scene. But
exactly, yeah. And so you see what I mean? So his commitment to going forward practically, right?
Yeah.
It is the act of faith, right?
Yeah.
And in that act of faith, he can see there's a revealing to him of what the reality is. Throughout the film, he has an insight into the real that no one else has. Why? He remains resolute. He stays with the practice, right? And then now what is Malik doing in the film? He's taking what was once a hidden life and he's revealing it to us, right?
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like there's this great Heideggerian irony double over on the thing. Yeah.
So I just want to say a few more things on the problem of evil, and then maybe we can take some questions from the audience and jam on whatever interests them. Yes, like the commitment, the faith, right? There's the resolution important on what you could be wrong about, but I'm darn sure I'm not at the same time. You know what I mean? It's like when it comes to the problem of evil, for me, it's always a matter of like separating the clear from the unclear. On the side of theism, like, what do I see? Well, I think I see some things that are pretty logically clear. Like, it seems like compositeness cashes out in simplicity, potency cashes out in pure actuality, goodness and being are convertible, right? There's a lot of pretty tight logical connections.
Is it though, the commitment though, being wrong? The distinction I would make is not being wrong about your belief in God, but being wrong about your belief in the religion, in Christianity as a whole.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah. But even there, I would say there's still more that I see that's clear than versus the unclarity in the problem. Like, what is the problem of evil? It's a lot of stuff that's just unclear, right? It's a lot of stuff that you're not seeing that it doesn't fit together. You're just not seeing how it fits together, right? And this is, I think, something that people miss. Not seeing is not seeing not, right? Yeah. There's differences between paradox and contradiction, and people conflate the two all the time. Like, yeah, I might not see how this fits together with an all-good God, but at the same time, I don't see that it doesn't fit or can't fit, right? And so the thing that I always return to, I mean, just for myself and like moments of suffering, and don't think that philosophy can't do you any good at moments of suffering. It can be very therapeutic to remind yourself, use what is clear to shine light of what is unclear, or at least not get sucked away by what is unclear and lose sight of what is clear. And that to me is, I think it's always been of great help to me. And I just want to offer it and hope that it might be great help to people, at least taking what you might see as like useful in philosophy and seeing how it can help with the practical problem of evil. Right.
Yeah. So I agree with you.
Yeah. But I mean, I think you could be a theist and think human lives come to like absolutely useless bad ends, right? Okay, and I think it's only Christianity in going beyond what we can get the natural theology that tells us that no human life comes to an absolutely useless bad end, assuming like faithfulness to the gospel or something like that, right?
Right.
But like certainly, like Aristotle has no problem thinking, right? The vast majority of human lives are going to come to like a pointless bad end, right? Do you see what I mean? Right.
Yeah, I agree. And like this is actually pretty funny because sometimes you'll have theists who will I think this is not a great move, but it still is actually a pretty good point if you're just trying to win an argument, who'll respond to say like Schellenberg's hiddenness argument and be like, look, Aristotle had no issue with that. He's a theist. Yeah. Clearly this is not I'm like, kind of cold, dude, but you do have a point, right?
Yeah, I mean the Schellenberg, the divine hiddenness is not really an issue if you hold to God as existence itself or actus purus. I don't think it's an issue at all. And I've had some friends who are hardcore convinced that divine hiddenness is a big issue, but when you actually talk about and when you study divine hiddenness, Schellenberg is clear in my thinking. Schellenberg clearly is talking about a very different conception of God. And that God, I totally agree with Schellenberg. If somebody believes in that God, divine hiddenness is a big problem. But if you're a classical theist, and I use that sort of generally, I don't think it is a problem. And I think Pat, you wrote.
I just linked it. I literally have a Substack responding to, and you're right, because like relating with God is participating in the divine nature, which is like equivalent with our moral development, and which is what God primarily cares about, right? So the whole idea of relationship with God on a classical theist model is very different than what a lot of people who I think Schellenberg is kind of aiming at with his argument. I think that's spot on. Yeah. Let's do some questions here, guys, if that's cool with you. You guys still got some time?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
I got more time than money.
I got lots of time.
Our buddy Horseman says hello. Good to see you, Horseman. As always,
Horseman.
thanks for chiming in.
Is Horseman who's Horseman?
Yeah, he's
a regular. He's a regular. Right?
He's somewhat a regular. Always has a lot of good thoughts and comments. So we appreciate him here.
I like your name, Horseman.
Here's Enrique. Enrique says, "What would you guys recommend as far as reading goes to get back to Christianity from agnosticism?" Great question. I'll let you guys go first. I've been talking too much already.
I mean, there is reading. I always recommend The Confession by Leo Tolstoy, because Tolstoy is gone through, as we previously mentioned, gone through everything. He's sort of recounting his return back to it. That's one. The second one is one that Amos and I are actually going through. Amos, my co-host, and I are going through is Dominion by Tom Holland. It's actually a fascinating book.
I've heard of that book. Yeah,
written by a man who was an atheist, now I think agnostic, but kind of leaning somewhat Christian.
He's
right?
Leaning towards. He brought up Anglican, became atheist, researched, wrote doing his research, writing Dominion, returned back to the Anglican Church, but I think he's not what he would call, I think, confirmed Anglican, but he's now entering the church. And I think every time he's on a new podcast, he seems to be inching closer and closer to it.
He's on his way. Now, he's so interesting, real quick, because he was fascinated by Greek history. He's a scholar, obviously, and then realized by studying it more and more, and Jim, this is what we talked about with the Republicans, like, these guys don't have exactly the same moral conception of the world that I'm comfortable with, right? Right. So he actually gives a sort of unintended but really important moral apologetic for Christianity in many ways as a historian. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would say, those, if you start with those two books and then.
Yeah. So I find the question kind of puzzling. Okay. So, and maybe I'm overanalyzing, but that's, I guess, my professional liability. But like, what would you guys recommend to read to get back to Christianity from agnosticism? Well, if you're asking, how do I get back from agnosticism? It sounds like you're already there then. Like it's like Christianity. If you're looking to get back to Christianity, it's not an open question to you. Like you're in some sense a Christian then, right? I mean, like
at that point,
I don't know what it means to want to be a Christian and not to be one, right?
Right.
Okay, you know what I mean? If you're already at the agnostic point where it's not like a nostalgia thing, like, I'm an atheist, but gosh, life would be easier to be a Christian. So it seems like in some sense, you are a Christian, right? At least in some very broad sense, and now you're looking to develop that. Do you see my point? And I like that he says, "What do I do?" Okay, you know what I mean? And and I'm not saying this for like Pascal wager wise, because it sounds like you've come over, right? Okay, join a church, man. Become a part of a community.
Well, I see Horseman. This is the next comment. He recommends Pascal, and I'll say a number of things. Like, one is like, what is your intellectual barrier, if you have one, and if so, address it. I'm confident you'll find good answers, and you might have to drive through for a while, but I'll tell you, there's few things as satisfying as just taking an issue and grinding it to the ground, right? And I think that there's great fruit that can come out of something like that. So is it the existence of God? Is it the historicity of Christianity? Like, tons of resources there, but identify if you want to be more specific, then maybe we can help with that. If you're, and depending on what level you're at too, right? If you're a professional philosopher, then like maybe something like the Blackwell Companion of Natural Theology, right? Which has an excellent essay by Tim and Lydia McGrew making an argument for miracles for the resurrection in it. So if like if you're stuck like really intellectually and you just want some like heavyweight argumentation, then maybe something like that. The Pascalian thing's interesting because there's a relatively new book called Taking Pascal's Wager by Dr. Michael Rota. He gives a contemporary version of this. And, it's traditional kind of Pascal move, but he makes it clear like this doesn't do the argumentation for you, right? This comes in when you're already kind of at a certain spot and you're kind of like 50-50. agnosticism or atheism and Christianity specifically, like you've surveyed the arguments, you've gotten yourself to this position, and you just can't make like an intellectual tiebreaker, right? For whatever reason. Then what Rhoda's going to say is, look, here's the pros, here's the cons, and all of like the sort of psychosociological research shows that people who live a religious spiritual life tend to be better, not, in this world as well, right? So like it's pretty much at this point all upsides, very little downsides. What do you do? And this is Jim's point. This is like, well, you start going to scripture studies, you start hanging out with religious people, you start praying even conditionally. God, if there is a God, answer my prayers if I have a prayer. And you don't fake it, because you can't fake believe something, right? I can't just believe that there's a bunch of gold in my hands right now. I don't know how to do that, right? But you can start to engage in sincere participation in religious seeking. And that's what Rhoda advises. And go sit in it at Bible studies, participate, find religious people, have these deep conversations, do conditional prayers, seek as authentically and genuinely as you can. I think that doing aspect is a big part of it, right?
And Ajay, jump in. You've been turning.
No, I was. If I can make one point about Jim's and you guys' point about doing, there's a quote from the Guanxi, this Chinese, tiny Chinese little philosophy book, and in it just says, the master and the student are talking, and Jim has probably heard me talk about this so many times. And the student asks the master, "How do I live? What do I do with my life? What do I do to go about living a good life?" And the master responds, "The way is made by walking in it."
Yeah.
And that to me is essentially what you guys are talking about. It's that there's only so much you can do, abstract thinking and conversing you can do. It's at the end of the day, you sort of you have to commit and start walking, and in your walk, then you'll discover lots of things, and you'll come across problems and joys and pains on that journey. But you do have to make that existential claim.
Yeah, and my view, IJ, this is why I'm skeptical of apologetics, because I don't think the abstraction can happen unless it's built on the way that you're walking, right?
Right. Right.
But there's one more thing about the earlier question. I don't mean to pick at the question too much, but I think it's important for stuff that comes up for us a lot here is if you say you're trying to get back to Christianity, what do I read? Well, you're not. I worry about that you're looking for an authority you can appeal to. You're not in an inquiry. You're like, I want to get back to Christianity. Show me something that will show me that it's right. Well, then it seems to me you're rigging the game, and that's fine because it's fine to rig the game if you're now a committed Christian. Just admit that, and don't look for a textual authority that you can lean on to like give you a kind of like apologetic club to say that you're right. Do you know what I mean? I'm all for reason, right? But I think a lot of times what people are asking is, give me a smart guy that I can make my smart guy to appeal to, because I know this is the way I want to go, right? Do you see that?
It's a delegation of your reasoning to somebody else.
Yeah, like I'm going to offload this onto some authority, and look, I think we all have to do it at some point, but let's not call that philosophy, right? Let's not call that reason. Let's just say what I'm doing is I'm taking the path now, and I'm gonna I want to be a part of the intellectual tradition of that path, and I want to learn it and all that stuff. But it's not about conviction at that point. You've brought the conviction to the table, and welcome aboard, son. God bless you. Right?
God bless you.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah.
Welcome, Enrique.
Yeah.
Horseman has a remark. He says, Alan Bloom saw the crisis in the academy years ago, and when he first read The Closing of the American Mind 11 years ago while studying Poland, I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't.
No, he wasn't.
Not
at all.
Poland. Is Horseman from Poland?
Yeah, you.
Oh man!
If you don't mind sharing, Horseman, that'd be cool.
I don't know Horseman,
I think we've heard from him before. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Horseman again offers many insightful comments here. So, assuming that there's not too many people
Soul
with
trains in jiu-jitsu. Let's go, Soul.
Yep.
Soul says philosophy of humility this morning. I don't know. I think I've probably been more boastful than I should have been already. It's all right. We got confession right after this, guys. So we'll go take care of that. Said I had to go to open mat jiu-jitsu alone, and I was the only new guy. Last 30 seconds between submitting became a quick mantra. Didn't say I'm 2 times older when I lasted 55. So good to see you on the mat, Saul.
Look, man, I don't want to hear that I'm 2 times older thing. If your jiu-jitsu was better, you would have beat him. Right. Plain and simple. And look, you'll get there. Right. You'll get there. I mean, I say that I whenever I run someone who's twice my size or half my age, and they're kind of apologetic after they beat me, I'm like, no, if my jiu-jitsu were better, I would have beat you. Yeah. Let's keep training. Yeah. Right. So keep at it, Saul. I literally love that you're on that journey. He's been hitting me on Twitter talking about it. That's great, man. Okay. And just hang in there, Saul. And in one of these days, you're going to catch one of those young guys, and it's going to be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you catch it, it'll be a moment in which you go, oh, this thing works. And
it works. Yeah.
It's a beautiful moment, right? Yep. And it's very clear when you're training in the beginning. When that happens, you're like, holy mackerel, I feel like I have superpowers.
Yeah, it's like someone else did it. You feel like someone else did it. Yeah.
Right. Jim, so, your favorite topic, emergence. Saul, now this is a question. He's dialoguing with a materialist who keeps saying his will is emergent. His will, interesting. But I ask how matter creates his immaterial will, since like a somewhat confused conversation here, which then directs that same matter, and you sort of hand wave. So take that however you want, Jim, because I know you've been thinking a lot about emergence.
Can I add to Saul before Jim answers?
Yeah.
So that Jim can respond. So he's talking about will. Saul's talking about will. I've been thinking about emergence of mind from just the material physicalness of us, right? And the more I think about the emergence of mind, I've become more convinced that, and this is more controversial from a theist, but it seems that minds do emerge from material. It just seems that
I think nothing could be more obvious than that's the case.
Okay.
Right. I mean, right. I mean that indeed, that the conditions of there being human-mindedness, that there be a kind of nervous system involved, right?
Right. My biggest issue, real quick, with emergence is that it's in so many ways trivial, right? I'll borrow a thing from, like, clearly our universe is loaded with called information states. When certain conditions are met, things emerge, right? That's just what happens. But that doesn't mean that's like the full of the story, right? It seems like we need an expansive enough ontology or metaphysics to actually make sense of emergence. So it isn't, the question for me isn't whether it's emergence or not emergence. It's how do we make sense of emergence?
So I was going to say, Saul, well, your friend's right. It clearly does. Right. I mean, okay. But the problem is I think on both sides of this issue, we have a completely useless way of thinking about the difference between material and immaterial, right? Mind and matter, whatever you call, right? And so, we are all taking these really bad, and even, I think even a lot of Thomists and the author of Mind, Matter, and Nature, I think to some extent too, are taking these really bad Cartesian assumptions that we all claim to renounce. And I'm like, if we are going to renounce Cartesianism, damn it, then let's renounce Cartesianism and quit taking that way of thinking of material versus immaterial, mind versus matter, and all that stuff, right? That keeps giving us these puzzles, right? Do you see my point? And so I think, what I'm sure what your friend, the material, said about emergence was incoherence. And I'm sure your counter to it was equally incoherent, because we're all taking the bad bait. Yeah.
Okay. So this is something that I've had conversations with friends here. So I don't know if you guys talk about this on the podcast, so it might be too. So when people take very powerful psychedelics like DMT, right? And Michael Braden is the one who turned me on to psychedelics to just learn a bit more from the research that he was telling me on the podcast when he was on a few years ago. The reason part of the main reasons I think that the mind emerge has nothing to do with thought. I don't have any powerful philosophical arguments, but it just seems to be that people who take DMT have this experience with what's known as the purple woman, right?
Yeah.
And across
or the worm.
I don't know anything about the worm. I just know about the
purple. Or the elves. Yeah.
The worm or the elves.
How is it possible that every human not every human, but the majority of people who take DMT, doesn't matter if they're connected or not connected, they all have this experience with this purple woman.
Yep.
And it's puzzling. It's been puzzling me so much so that I now think, okay, maybe minds do emerge from
or maybe that there's something about our physical system that acts as a lensing agent, as Sokolowski talks about it. That's sort of a perspective that I'm quite attracted to.
Or maybe mind is out there, and as part of our development, we are initiated into it, right? And this is my view, right?
Yeah.
You don't have a mind; you participate in a mind.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. My biggest issue with emergence is that I just don't think a reductive physicalist account can make sense of it.
No, but the thing is emergentists are saying, we're rejecting reductive physicalism and becoming emergentists, right?
Right.
The problem is they're still wrapped into the Cartesian, like what Charles Taylor and Herbert Dreyfus call the dualist sorting, right? They're still wrapped in the dualist sorting, and they're still trying to. So the dualist, the Cartesian dualist has a problem of explaining how mental things could affect physical things, but the emergentist has an equally the same inverse problem of how physical things on the dualist sorting could affect mental things, right?
And so much of that confusion is we just don't have clear conceptions of not just the immaterial, but the material either.
Totally. And so and this for me has been my thing in the last several years is okay, if I'm really going to say I'm not going for the dualist sorting, what are the consequences of that, and how do I have to think about mind? And which led me to rethink the whole damn thing.
We're looking forward to your book.
I know, and I'm actually when I'm done here, I'm sending an email to the editor to get a little nag. So where are we going? But the introduction, the first half of the introduction is available on my website right now, and I think I'll put up the second half in a couple days here. So jdmadden.com.
You guys got it. All right, let's
I know I forget who asked the question. Good question. I'm giving a lot of snotty answers to good questions today. I'm sorry, but
it is. And I would say just a general rule of dialogue is just always be patient, ask questions. What do you mean by emergent? What do you mean by material? What do you mean by will? Right? Just spend and it's not just because I think you're going to win the argument that way, but things tend to be far more productive when you actually ask questions, because then people will get the sense that you might actually be interested in what they have to say, rather than just trying to win an argument. And if there's any chance of something being productive on social media,
people don't change their minds because your argument's so good, right? People change their minds more so because of relationships, which is, for better or worse, that's just the way it seems to work.
Spot on.
So I've got a blog post I'm working on now that's going to be termite epistemology and religious apologetics, right? Okay. And then after I'm done with that one, I think I'm going to go. My next one's going to be why everybody smart is a panpsychist. Okay. And so that'll take up a lot of this stuff there.
Okay.
So
we'll do an episode on panpsychism at some point. I think we need to.
But no, panpsychism is said in many ways. Yeah.
Horseman says, Jim, you suggested some time ago watching Another Round. Thank you for the recommendation. Brilliant movie that I definitely needed at the time. I haven't seen that, so I'll put it in the queue.
And I'm going to give a shout out to my boy, Dr. Richard White, of the theology department at Benedictine, who turned me onto that film. He is, I think, one of the great minds in film in America that you've never heard of, right? Is Richard White here at Benedictine.
When was that film made?
Fairly recently, I think, 20 teens. It's a Dutch film. Yeah, go check it out. It's incredible.
I just wrote it down.
Yeah, do it. Yeah, tonight, treat yourself to this film. I think Jen hasn't seen it. I think I'm going to drag her through it tonight.
I will be at a brewery tonight with a priest, actually. So
well, I'll tell you what. The movie, Another Round. It's another round of brew, right? It's about.
Whoa, okay, so even more appropriate.
It's basically about a guy who, in midlife, just consciously takes up drinking, just takes it up, right? It's like I'm not really a drinker, but I'm going to become one, right? Yeah, it's interesting.
That is. All right. No spoilers then. All right. Next one's from Parker. Jim, I remember you saying in a previous episode that Greek tragedy, specifically how do you pronounce that, Jim? Just because I'm Oedipus trilogy poses the problem.
The problem.
Could you elaborate? Does it have to do with an agnostic view of reality?
Not agnosticism. I mean, I see Greek tragedy as Greek polytheism, realizing that it's run its course. And we talked about this a little bit yesterday about Plato's Book One of the Republic. I see the Socratic school of philosophy, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, as an attempt to construct a monotheistic reply to the diagnosis of the failings of polytheism that you see in Greek tragedy, right? So I think that's one thing. I see that especially in Aeschylus, right? So the Aeschylus is trilogy of the Orestes, which is Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, and the Eumenides, right? I use those three plays as the background before I teach the Republic in my ethics class, right? Yeah, because what you get is in those plays, you get the characters are always, having to choose between the values of conflicting gods, and inevitably they choose wrongly, and the Furies come and get them, right? The Furies demand this visceral, passionate kind of justice, right? And what I read the Socratic school is doing is giving us a monotheism, right? A ultimate perspective that allows us to judge properly and keep the Furies in their place, right? Specifically with Oedipus, and specifically the play Oedipus Rex, I mean that I find that play just so profound, and so we all know this. Maybe we know the story about Oedipus Rex is that Oedipus is born. There's a prophecy that he's going to murder his father and marry his mother, right? Okay, and his parents, who are king and queen of Corinth, they're like, okay, he's got to go. So they give him to one of their servants to kill, right? It's Greece. And the servant chickens out. So Oedipus survives, but he knows about the prophecy, right? And so he goes on the road and he doesn't want, he wants to avoid it. And then one day he happens to, kill a guy who, gave him some flack on the road. He's a Greek warrior, so he kills him, right? And then there just happens to be a city nearby, right? And there's a widowed queen there, right? And he saves him from a plague by solving a riddle, and he marries this queen, and and then he's the man, right? He is the model of the good, the Greek hero. And then there's another plague comes to the city, and it turns out, the Oracle of Delphi says the reason you have this plague is there is in your midst a parricide who's done incest, right? That's why there's a plague in the city. And Oedipus vows, I will find this man and I will put his eyes out and cast him out of the city so we can be free of this plague. Okay. And it's important to note, like it's the Oracle of Delphi that makes this known. And the Temple of Delphi's motto is famously, know thyself. Okay. And so this is my read on Oedipus is Oedipus, I mean, it's sort of hard to believe he doesn't know what's going on. I mean, like the way I put it to my students, do you think it's possible for your mother to have sex with one of your brothers and she wouldn't have some sense that there was something wrong here? Right? Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Like, do you think it was just odd to him that like people ever since he got to the Thebes had said, gee, you kind of look a lot like your wife. Wasn't there a prophecy that you would like marry your mom? Right? You know what I mean? And so I don't think Sophocles is like thinks we're stupid, right? And so I think implicitly it's that the truth about himself was there all along for Oedipus, and he ignored it. He didn't ask the tough questions about himself, and so it's not that his fate was settled by the gods. Like he's a participant in his fate by his unwillingness to ask hard questions of himself, of his failure to know himself, right? And so what I see Oedipus as is this call to authenticity, and an authenticity that can only come through philosophy, a kind of knowing yourself, a kind of asking yourself hard questions, right? And the very last line of the play is like, count no man happy until he's dead, right? Because you don't know who this person is till he's dead. And think of how book one of Aristotle's Ethics, a very major theme there is we don't know if you're happy until you're dead, right? Because we don't know you, right? And so I see Oedipus Rex specifically as setting up, here's why you need philosophy in your life, right? Because you need self-knowledge. Because if you don't have self-knowledge, if you can't ask yourself these really grim questions about yourself, your kingdom, your world, your family, all this stuff, then you're not good, you're lucky, right? And Oedipus wasn't good, he was lucky, right? And the luck ran out, right?
Yeah.
And I see the point of Greek philosophy is to minimize the role of luck in your life and to maximize the role of truth in your life, right? And until you know yourself, you're just lucky, Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
So that's why I see it's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah. There was a bunch of, I don't know if you guys could hear that. There was some weird ringing going on. Did you?
Really?
All right, I got distracted. Apparently somebody was trying to call me on social media. I don't know who does that. So
That's right.
if you just saw me like looking around, like
No
it wasn't that I was like confused by what you were saying, Jim. There was a bunch of noise in my headset there for a minute.
Yeah.
Very good.
And so I use the Oedipus trilogy too in class.
Cool. The point about luck though, Jim, is I think it goes beyond just talking about Greek philosophy and about talking about your life. It goes into actually living your life. You don't want to live a lucky life, right? You don't want to do things because it happened to you by chance or by luck. You want to do it such that if anything, you make the luck, I suppose you sort of make the luck happen or whatever you call it. You make it happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, excellent. So I just want to say, so I have to split here soon. I've got the in-laws in and other commitments. Yeah. But I want
real quick to say, put it the way I think what Ajay is getting at is you want to live a life for which you can give reasons.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
Like Bob the Chameleon.
Bob the Chameleon.
So let's take one more though. So Ajay, you're the special guest. Is there any comment or question here that's speaking out to you that you think we should hit before we?
I didn't even know there was a comment section.
There is.
Geez,
or
Jim,
Jim, maybe Jim sees one. I always like my guests to pick the finisher here.
Oh man,
let me see if I can pick one for Ajay here. I don't know.
Is race, ethnicity an authentic aspect of Thomistic anthropology? Whoa, man, I've never really even thought about that.
Ajay's in Canada. He can't talk about that.
Oh man, there's
great
so many questions.
Yeah,
wow,
great questions and comments today, guys. Sorry we're not gonna be able to get through all of them, but hopefully we've given you some good stuff. Horseman says real quick, it's harder to be healthy than to get sick. It's easier to destroy than to build. It's easier to cause. Yeah, I don't disagree with necessarily all that, but that's not exactly what the privation theory is saying, right? So, the privation theory is a metaphysical theory, right? That says at the end of the day, our causing evil in the world is there's going to be something lacking there that should have been there, particularly a judgment pertaining to an action. If you're talking about human free action, right? Maritan's great at dissecting the metaphysics of this, right? There's a run up, there's first a negation where we're not considering a moral rule or something that we habitually know. Then we fail to apply that consideration to a particular judgment, and then it becomes a privation, right? There's something missing there that otherwise would be due. And then, we blow somebody's limb off, but the thing that's evil there is they now don't have a limb when they should, right? Right. So it's not, and I think this is a point that horses make. It's a good one. This is not something that you like try to recount to somebody in the depths of their suffering, right? No. It's not going to be emotionally therapeutic. This is something that St. Augustine struggled with when he was kind of like wrestling with the problem of evil metaphysically from a sort of the perspective of Manichaeism, right? And then he realized they're just not on the same metaphysical par, right? There's always this prior conception I need of goodness to even make sense of evil. And then, of course, the tradition of privation theory comes through that. Now, look, there's tricky things you got to make sense of, and there's great books on that. David Oderberg's recent magisterial treatment, The Metaphysics of Good and Evil, I think is right up there, top notch, if you want to dive deeper into that. So sorry, I snuck one in there, but you guys pick the last one.
There's Andrew asked about McIntyre.
Here it is. What is McIntyre's deal with his critique of human rights? Does this relate to his criticism of liberalism? Great final question. Let's do it.
And I think we should do an episode on McIntyre sometime. Right. And okay, so I'm going to give you a really quick version. What is McIntyre's deal with his critique of human rights is that McIntyre thinks the whole notion that we need this concept of a right that's divorced from the good is a sign that the teleological basis of ethics has been undermined. Okay. So, and so McIntyre is not sure we even know what we mean by a right independent from the human good. Right. And yes, Andrew, does this relate to his critique of liberalism? Yes, because like liberalism is built on this notion of like thinking of people like John Rawls, the right as opposed to the good. Okay. And McIntyre thinks, as soon as you've turned that corner, you're going to fall into some kind of moral subjectivism because there's no way to like ground rights independently of goods. Okay. So like you're actually, Andrew, getting at like what McIntyre's critique of modernity is right there. Yep.
Excellent. Good stuff. Hey, IJ, make sure you tell the good people about your podcast. Where can they follow you? Where can they catch your content? How can they subscribe to your stuff? Give us all those good details, my friend.
We started a YouTube not too long ago. So if you search up Kazingram, Kazingram Dialogue, you can find it on YouTube. And then, whatever your favorite podcast platform is, you can find it there. Or you can go to the website, kazingram.com, and you'll find it there as well. And we're on Twitter. And we have an episode with Jim coming out next week.
Yeah. Maybe our best episode, I think. I think we had a good one.
It's one of my favorite conversations. So that'll be coming up. So you guys should check the episode out when it comes
We do talk about termites in this too, don't we?
Dude.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Well, this has been an absolute pleasure, gentlemen. I love these where we don't come in here with an agenda. We literally just said we're just chatting on Facebook. We'll just hit play and whatever comes up comes up. And this has just been a blast. IJ, I've been looking forward to chatting with you. This certainly did not disappoint. We're gonna do more of these, to be sure. If you would be willing, this has been.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor to be on the Pat Flynn show with yourself and Jim.
Because Pat's an OG at this, IJ.
Yeah, right?
I know. He's an original. And I want to thank both of you guys for sparing me the trouble of having to have a podcast. Right?
Yeah, anytime, man. Yeah.
I've just been able to co-opt your platforms, right? So thank you. Thank you, gentlemen.
Good stuff. So gentle listeners, check out IJ. Head over. I put the link to his website in the comments. So give that a click. Subscribe to his podcast. Tons of good stuff there. Please like, share, and subscribe this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We do love hearing from you. And we'll catch you next time. Adios.